Hey everybody, the calendar is done. We got a bunch of orders, and we're sending them out as soon as possible. This video is for the month of December, and if you'd like to buy a calendar, we have a linked comment where you can buy it on eBay. Thank you guys so much and enjoy the video. Hello Super Horror family and friends. Welcome to another episode of Painting Legends. Today I will be sharing some true pale crawler sightings while I paint. So I found this other background here in Vermilion, this creepy mansion. I should have used this the whole time if I knew it was here. This is perfect for these videos. It's creepy, you can set it to nighttime. It's amazing. And you can put all your paintings up on the wall. So anyway, pale crawler stories have been becoming more and more common. These mysterious humanoid creatures are reported in various regions worldwide. Sightings describe them as tall, 6 to 8 feet, thin beings with pale, sometimes translucent looking skin, and dark sunken eyes. They are typically seen moving on all fours, but are sometimes observed standing upright. Witness accounts frequently mention their elongated limbs, gangly appearance, and lack of body hair or clothing. They are most often seen in rural areas. Their unsettling movements and eerie presence have drawn comparisons to popular fictional entities, like the Rake, from creepypasta lore. Now for the stories. First story, The Pale Watcher of Noblesville. In the early hours of a June night in 2020, a couple from central Indiana encountered something they would never forget while driving the rural roads near Noblesville, Indiana. Tony shared the account of that eerie encounter during the quiet days of the COVID-19 lockdown. Feeling cooped up, Tony and his girlfriend often took late-night drives along secluded roads to pass the time. On this particular night, around 12:45 to 1 a.m., they were navigating a desolate stretch of road near US 37 and 191st Street. Surrounded by dense forest, the absence of other cars or homes prompted Tony to switch on his high beams for better visibility. As they rounded a curve and the road straightened, Tony suddenly slammed on the brakes. Illuminated in the car's headlights was an otherworldly figure in the middle of the road. It was pale, almost pure white, and humanoid in shape, but its features were anything but ordinary. The creature was crouched low, with unnaturally long legs and arms that extended so far its elbows nearly touched the pavement. Its posture was unsettlingly human-like, but the proportions were grotesque. Before Tony could process what he was seeing, his girlfriend screamed, and the creature bolted. Moving with unnatural speed, it dropped to all fours and sprinted towards a nearby tree. In a single, fluid motion, it leapt 15 to 20 feet into the branches, disappearing into the canopy. The couple caught a glimpse of it stretching as it jumped, accentuating its already spindly, skeletal frame. In those fleeting moments, Tony noted its distinctively humanoid head with black, sunken eyes, a long face, and a closed mouth. The creature's movements seemed calculated, almost intelligent, as though it understood it wasn't supposed to be seen. Despite its agility, it was too gaunt and elongated to be mistaken for any known animal. Tony estimated its length at about 6.5 to 7 feet. Shaken, Tony shared the experience with his best friend, who introduced him to the legend of the Rake. The resemblance was uncanny. Tony has since driven that stretch of road multiple times, but the pale humanoid figure has never reappeared. The memory of that night, however, lingers, leaving Tony to wonder if anyone else has encountered something similar in the shadowy woods of Hamilton County. The Lurker by the Tracks. Liz lived a quiet life in suburban New York, but an incident late one night shattered her sense of safety. The unsettling experience wasn't hers directly. it belonged to her boyfriend. Yet the fear he conveyed was so vivid it became her own. It began on a warm, still night when her boyfriend was walking home from her house. His usual shortcut took him along an abandoned railway track that cut through a wooded area. Locals spoke in hushed tones about strange occurrences along the tracks, shadowy figures, strange noises, but he always dismissed such stories. That night, he encountered something that made him rethink everything. Liz's phone buzzed around midnight. When she answered, her boyfriend's voice came through, shaky and panicked. "Something's out there," he stammered. She pressed for details, and his description sent chills through her. He told her he had noticed movement ahead in the faint moonlight, something hunched and unnatural. As he drew closer, the figure came into view. It was naked and hairless, its pale skin almost glowing in the darkness. Its long limbs looked too thin to support its body, yet it moved with an unsettling fluidity. What struck him most were its eyes, yellow and reflective, glinting like a predator's in the dark. The creature emitted a low, clicking growl, a sound so unnatural it made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. When it let out a sharp, ear-piercing shriek, he didn't wait to see what it would do next. Heart pounding, he turned and sprinted towards his house, not daring to look back. Liz stayed on the line, trying to calm him until he finally burst through his front door, locking it behind him. The next day, Liz tried to reassure him that it might have been a trick of the light or a stray animal. They ventured back to the tracks during daylight. Near the spot where he had seen the creature, they found something grotesque, the flesh carcass of a deer. Its small body had been mutilated in an unnatural, disturbing way. The sight made Liz's stomach churn. There were no signs of scavenger activity, no tracks or drag marks. The following day, when they returned, out of morbid curiosity, the carcass was gone. Not a trace of blood or fur remained, as though it had never been there. Liz and her boyfriend exchanged uneasy glances, the silence between them heavy with unspoken fears. Even now, Liz can't shake the lingering feeling that something unnatural resides near the tracks. Sometimes, when she's alone at night, she swears she hears faint clicking noises, carried on the wind. Echoes in the pines. Holly and her family often camped in the serene wilderness of the Sierra Nevada mountains, just outside Yosemite National Park. The area was heaven for them, a place of peace and beauty where the worries of the modern world melted away. But during one trip, their familiar sanctuary took on a darker, stranger tone. It was late summer, the nights cool and clear, the sky a canvas of stars. Holly and her young son and a few close friends had set up camp in one of their favorite spots, a secluded area surrounded by towering pines. For the first 2 nights, their trip was uneventful. They spent their days hiking and their evenings gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and laughter. On the 3rd night, as the fire's embers dimmed and the world settled into an eerie quiet, Holly and her son stepped out of their tent to gaze at the stars before bed. The forest seemed unusually still. The usual chorus of nocturnal animals oddly absent. Then, from the shadows, movement caught Holly's eye. Standing about 50 feet away were 2 figures. At first, Holly thought they were other campers, though why would anyone wander into their secluded site in the dead of night? But as her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she realized these were no ordinary visitors. The beings were humanoid in shape, but unnervingly wrong. Their pale skin gleamed faintly under the moonlight, their bodies elongated and skeletal. their heads slightly too large for their frames. Before Holly could react, the silence shattered. The creatures emitted an unearthly wail, a piercing, banshee-like scream that echoed through the forest, unnatural and bone-chilling. The sound should have terrified them, but strangely, it didn't. Instead, Holly felt a calm resolve settle over her, as though some unseen force was protecting her and her family. She instinctively began to pray aloud, her son joining in a trembling but determined voice. The creatures lingered, their eerie cries filling the air, but they didn't approach. After about half an hour, they melted back into the darkness, leaving Holly and her family shaken, but unharmed. When the group discussed the encounter over coffee the next morning, the atmosphere was oddly serene. No one spoke of fear, only of the calm that they had felt, a shared certainty that these beings held no power over them. The events repeated over the next 2 nights. Around midnight, the pale creatures would appear, standing silently at a distance before unleashing their otherworldly wails. Each time, Holly and her family prayed aloud, and each time the beings eventually retreated. By the end of the trip, the group felt an inexplicable sense of closure, as if they had faced something ancient and unknowable, and emerged unscathed. Holly remains convinced that their faith shielded them, though the memory of the creatures lingers in her mind, like a shadow at the edge of the firelight, always watching. The red-eyed stalker of Twin Lakes. In September 2014, a couple vacationing at Twin Lakes Resort in the Sierra Nevada mountains encountered a creature so unsettling that it left them questioning reality. The husband, a seasoned outdoorsman and visual artist, vividly described the event that transpired in the early morning hours. At around 5:30 a.m., the couple left their rustic cabin to drive to a nearby creek, eager for a quiet morning of fishing. The road was empty, and pre-dawn air still and cold. As they approached a small trailer campground, their car's headlights illuminated something darting across the road. At first, the man thought it might be a goat, but its unnatural movements made him hesitate. The creature's body was low to the ground, its pale hairless form almost blending into the dusty earth. As they drew closer, the car's beams revealed more details. Details that defied explanation. The creature paused and turned its head towards them. Its torso hovered mere inches above the ground, supported by unnaturally long limbs. These limbs moved in a jerky, puppet-like motion, as though it wasn't fully in control of its body. What froze the couple in their tracks was its face, a disturbingly human-like face. Its flat nasal bridge, smooth skin, and taut lips pulled into a tight, sinister grin exuded a malevolent air. Most horrifying were its eyes, or rather the hollow spaces where the eyes should have been. The creature's deep red eye sockets absorbed the headlights without reflecting a single glimmer of light, an unnatural trait that heightened its alien presence. For a moment, it stared at them, unblinking and cold. Then, as if irritated by the intrusion, the creature jerked its head away and scurried into the dense bushes at the roadside. Its swift, almost insect-like movements kicked up a cloud of dust, and within moments it was gone, swallowed by the wilderness. The couple sat in stunned silence, the oppressive quiet of the forest pressing down on them. The man, who prided himself on his knowledge of local wildlife, was at a loss. He replayed the encounter in his head, searching for any resemblance to any known creatures, but none came close. The wife, a longtime skeptic, admitted that the encounter defied rational explanation. In the days that followed, the man couldn't shake the feeling that the creature had been deliberately out of place, as though it had stepped into their reality by mistake. its proximity to a human-inhabited area, and the eerie sense of awareness it displayed left him uneasy. He wondered if anyone else had ever encountered something so chillingly out of the ordinary, or if it had been watching them all along. The Pale Stalker of Digman's Ferry. In 2016, deep in the heart of Pennsylvania's Pocono Mountains, near Digman's Ferry, an outdoorsman experienced a chilling encounter that forever changed his perception of the natural world. This was not the kind of story told around campfires for cheap thrills. This was real, and it turned his once beloved wilderness into a source of unrelenting fear. A lifelong adventurer, William had spent countless hours hiking, fishing, and hunting, thriving in the solitude of the backcountry. But after what he saw that fateful night, he would never again venture into the woods alone. It began with an unsettling warning from a local friend who had encountered a bizarre humanoid creature multiple times near his home. The friend showed him a generic photo of a crawler humanoid, the kind that pops up on online searches. Initially skeptical, he dismissed the warning as a joke, possibly a ploy to keep him from snooping in the woods. Yet, something about the forest near his friend's house unsettled him. A dark, heavy energy that felt like an unspoken warning to stay away. Months later, one rainy night around midnight, his skepticism was shattered. He and a co-worker had just finished a late shift and were driving down the desolate road near his friend's house. Rain slicked and silent. The road ran parallel to a dense forest, broken only by sporadic houses. Suddenly, his co-worker slammed on the brakes, shouting in alarm. He claimed to have seen something crouched on the roadside. Without hesitation, the man leapt out of the car. That's when he heard it, the sound of something massive crashing through the underbrush, running parallel to the road. The car's high beams cut into the forest, and there it was. For at least 15 agonizing seconds, the headlights illuminated the creature. A towering 6-foot-tall figure, with ghastly gray-white skin, stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Long, skinny arms hung low as it sprinted with an eerily human-like gait. It moved with terrifying speed and agility, leaping effortlessly over fallen branches and rocks. Its presence exuded an undeniable malice, a predator's awareness that chilled him to his core. Then it vanished, slipping into the shadows beyond the headlights. But it wasn't done. Moments later, the creature reemerged, crawling on all fours like a grotesque mimicry of a predatory animal. It crossed the road just 60 yards ahead, its movements unnervingly smooth before vanishing into the woods on the other side. The encounter left him frozen, his mind racing to comprehend the unimaginable. What was this thing? It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. It was something else. Something that shouldn't exist. He says since that night he has been haunted, both awake and in his dreams. The image of the creature, its unnatural movements, its oppressive presence, has seared itself into his memory. The woods, once his sanctuary, now feel like a trap, hiding terrors that defy reason. Anxiety consumes him whenever he considers venturing into the wilderness. "I've lost my freedom," he admitted, his voice filled with a mix of sorrow and frustration. "This creature exists, and so do others that we can't understand. People need to know the truth. It's not just for their safety, but for their sanity. The world isn't what we think it is." Even now, he shares his story not to convince skeptics, but to unburden his soul and warn others. The Pale Stalker of Digman's Ferry still roams, unseen by most, but unforgettable to those who crossed its path. The Pale Horror in the Kentucky Shadows. In the eastern Kentucky mountains, two 14-year-old girls set out on an adventurous ATV ride, unaware that they would soon encounter something that would haunt them forever. Jen and her best friend were both far from help, deep in the woods near their isolated mountain path. The day began like any other, but things quickly took a terrifying turn. After flipping the ATV and injuring her friend's leg, Jen struggled to right the vehicle on her own. Despite her efforts, they flooded the engine. With no other choice, they decided to push the ATV down the mountain. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep pink as dusk settled around them. When, just as they were making their way down the mountain, Jen's friend froze, her eyes wide with fear. Without thinking, Jen turned to see what had captured her friend's attention. Standing about 15 feet behind them, in the growing shadows of the tree-lined path, was a creature. It was pale and hunched, with skin stretched taut over a skeletal humanoid form. At first, Jen thought it was just a trick of the light, or her imagination. But as her gaze locked onto the creature's face, a shiver ran down her spine. Its eyes were so deep-set, so dark, that at first, Jen believed that they were black pits. But as the fading sunlight struck them, she saw the reflection of light within. The creature's nose was flat, and its lips pale and trembling. Frozen in place, Jen's heart raced as the creature raised one bony hand, motioning them to be silent. Then, in a motion that seemed unnatural, it waved its skeletal claws, one finger at a time. Suddenly, a sound broke the tension. The ATV started. Jen's friend must have tried the engine while she was frozen in fear. Without hesitation, Jen leapt onto the back of the ATV, clutching her friend tightly. They sped away, their hearts pounding in their chests. When Jen dared to glance back, the creature was gone. They didn't stop until they reached Jen's parents about halfway down the mountain. By then, it was pitch black, and they were safe. The two girls later discussed what had happened, but neither could explain it. What had they seen? Was it trying to help? Or were they in more danger than they realized? Jen still hasn't been back to that mountain. The image of the pale creature haunts her, and though she's talked about it with her friend, they can't agree on what they saw. Jen searched for similar encounters, even in mythology, but no explanation quite fits. She knows what she saw, and she can't shake the feeling of whatever it was. It wasn't just a figment of her imagination. The silent stalker of northern Wisconsin. Jackie had lived her whole life in the remote wooded areas of northern Wisconsin. Nestled on an Ojibwe reservation, the deep woods had always surrounded her home, and while it was beautiful and peaceful, it also had its unsettling moments. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the horrifying encounters she would face. Experiences that had left her with an overwhelming sense of fear and dread. It all started 2 summers ago when Jackie and her ex-boyfriend were driving back from her grandparents' house. They had taken a familiar road, winding through the dense trees that bordered their reservation. As they came around a curve, they both saw something strange on the side of the road. At first glance, it appeared to be a person standing with its back turned to them. But the figure was wrong. Its skin had a peculiar texture, almost like buckskin, and its posture was unnaturally still. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Both Jackie and her ex felt a chill run down their spines, and without a word, they both knew they were witnessing something far from ordinary. The figure didn't move at all, not even as they slowly passed by. The terrifying stillness of it made Jackie's heart race. They had seen it, they both had, and it was undeniable. They sped away, and didn't speak about it for years. Jackie had recently gone through a painful breakup. Her ex had kicked her out, leaving her with nothing but her cats and a car packed with her belongings. She was on her way to her grandparents' house, needing a safe place to escape the tension and heartache. It was a cold night, the air thick with freezing rain. As she drove, she saw something in the distance, reflective eyes gleaming in the headlights. At first, she thought it was a deer, until the creature moved. This time, there was no doubt. The creature wasn't just standing there. It was on two legs, tall and unnaturally muscular. The skin once again had that strange buckskin-like appearance. Jackie's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a person. She slowed the car, trying to get a better look, but the creature remained eerily still. It was in the middle of nowhere, and the last thing she wanted was to confront whatever this thing was. The terror that gripped her was different this time. The creature seemed to recognize her, its eyes piercing the dark night, and Jackie felt as if it were watching her, waiting. A deep primal fear settled in her chest. Could it be the same one she'd seen all those months ago? Was there something about her, something that made it come back for her? The thought made her sick to her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the creature was hunting her, watching her every move. As Jackie drove away, she couldn't help but wonder if it would ever stop. The fear of seeing it again gripped her like a vice. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was following her, and every creak of the car, every rustle in the woods, felt like the creature's presence was right behind her. Encounter with the pale creature of Finland. On a cold autumn evening in late October 2018, a Finnish man named Mika experienced a terrifying encounter near a forested area outside of a small town. About 40 kilometers north of Helsinki, Mika, a factory worker and avid dog owner, was taking his energetic Labrador retriever Noki for a walk along a familiar forest trail. The moon was bright, and the frosty air made the surroundings unusually still, with only the crunch of leaves and the occasional distant hoot of an owl breaking the silence. As they approached a clearing about halfway through the trail, Noki suddenly stopped. His ears perked up, and he let out a low growl. Mika followed the dog's gaze and spotted what he initially thought was a person standing partially obscured by the shadow of a birch tree. However, as the figure stepped forward, Mika's stomach sank. The creature was unnaturally tall, standing at least 7 feet, with a grayish complexion. Its lanky limbs seemed too long for its thin frame, and its head was slightly oversized compared to the rest of its body. The creature's movements were jerky yet deliberate, as though it was testing its ability to step forward. Its eyes, large, dark, and reflective, fixed directly on Mika and Noki. Mika froze, unsure of what he was seeing. He whispered to Noki to stay calm, but the dog began barking furiously. As the creature tilted its head in an almost curious manner, Mika noted an eerie sound accompanying its movement. A faint cracking, as if dry branches were breaking. What happened next shattered Mika's already fragile nerves. The creature suddenly dropped to all fours and began crawling towards them with unsettling speed and fluidity. Panic took over, and Mika turned and ran, dragging a reluctant Noki with him. The forest trail, which he had always found peaceful, now felt endless. When Mika finally burst onto the gravel road where his car was parked, he released Noki, who bolted into the vehicle and jumped inside. Mika fumbled with his keys, his hands trembling, before driving away. He dared to glance back towards the trail. There, at the edge of the forest, stood the creature, illuminated by the car's headlights. It was completely still, its unblinking eyes reflecting the light in a way that made it appear almost otherworldly. Mika wasted no time speeding away, his heart racing. In the days following the encounter, Mika shared his story with close friends, some of whom admitted hearing tales of similar sightings in the area over the years, though none had experienced anything firsthand. When he posted his account online, others across Finland and even neighboring countries shared comparable stories, describing pale humanoid entities seen in remote areas. The creature Mika encountered remains a mystery, but it fits the description of the crawler phenomenon. The screams in the night. In October 2020, in a small town in Alabama, a chilling encounter unfolded that still haunts a man named Chris to this day. Living near the border of towns, Chris had no idea that one night would change everything. What began as a quiet evening at home with his girlfriend turned into an experience he couldn't rationalize, no matter how hard he tried. It was around 1 a.m. when Chris stepped outside for a cigarette. The sounds in the night were typical for the area, but then, from the direction of the woods near his development, he heard something that caught his attention. Someone screaming, crying for help. At first, he thought it was a fox, known for making noises that resemble a human's cry, but the scream continued, loud and clear, becoming more frantic. "Please, someone help me!" the voice cried. It was unmistakable now. It wasn't a fox. His concern grew as the cries persisted. Wondering if someone was in danger, he walked towards the source of the sound, which seemed to be coming from a small patch of woods across the main road. As he ventured closer, the scream shifted, moving down the street to another nearby development. Chris tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a TV, or perhaps a Halloween decoration. Something that would explain the screams. But it didn't sit right with him. His gut told him that something wasn't normal. He texted his girlfriend to keep her informed, just in case, and continued following the screams as they moved further away. After a few minutes, it became clear that whatever was making the noise was covering large distances, too quickly for a person in distress. Chris felt an unsettling unease in his stomach. He turned around and started to head back home, still unsure of what was happening. Just as he turned to walk back, the scream came again. This time it was much louder and more intense. "Please, someone help!" It was coming from a dense forest near a cell tower about 50 yards away. What happened next is still burned into Chris's memory. The screams were moving with him. They would shift to his right, then his left, as though whatever was making them was circling him. The sounds weren't just distant cries for help. They were becoming frantic, accompanied by strange grunting growls. For what felt like an eternity, the creature, or whatever it was, ran back and forth in the forest, sometimes stopping to scream, sometimes growling in a low guttural tone. Chris could hear the bushes rustling, twigs snapping under the weight of something moving quickly. It sounded like it was coming closer to him, its cries changing to something much darker. "Why aren't you helping me?" The terror in Chris's chest escalated. The growls became louder and faster, the sounds of something human-like crawling low to the ground becoming more distinct. There was no doubt in his mind that whatever was in the forest wasn't human. The movement was fast, and the pale white shape he glimpsed through the trees only added to the nightmare. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but his feet stayed rooted to the spot. He was terrified, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. Panicked, he immediately dialed 911. When the police arrived, the screams stopped as suddenly as they had begun. The officers searched the area, but found nothing. There was no trace of any person or animal in the woods. Still shaken and unsure of what he had experienced, Chris couldn't help but feel that something had been watching him. Something that knew exactly where he was, what he was doing, and wanted him to follow it into the woods. Since that night, Chris hasn't been able to shake the feeling that the encounter was far from normal. He's terrified to go outside after dark. The memory of the growls, the screams, and the feeling of being hunted never fading. He's left with more questions than answers, and his mind keeps returning to the pale, crawling figure in the woods. Whatever it wasn't a person, and it wanted something from him. A National Guardsman's close call with the unknown. In 2014, Sal, a National Guardsman stationed at Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, embarked on a routine night land navigation training with his platoon. having recently transitioned from enlisted to officer through ROTC. Sal was accustomed to these solo missions, as night land navigation is one of the few scenarios where soldiers were supposed to go out alone. With his map, compass, and red light headlamp in hand, he set off to the dense woods, aiming to locate his assigned markers. The area was part of a larger forest system, frequently traversed by soldiers, but on this night, only Sal's platoon was active. His headlamp was toggled to a red setting to preserve his night vision and maintain stealth. The first portion of Sal's route went smoothly, and by 10 p.m. he was sitting on a hillside taking a break. The air was cool and the moon was full, offering enough light to see through the forest gaps. After a while, Sal noticed some faint red lights bobbing in the distance below him, signaling another platoon's members making their way through the woods. A few moments later, a pair of soldiers passed by, using the white light to read their maps. Sal startled them with a simple greeting before returning to his solitary position. As Sal prepared to continue his journey, he noticed that the woods around him had gone silent. Most of the soldiers had either finished their routes or retreated back to base. He felt at peace, having spent a quiet hour on the hillside, listening to hoots of owls and the rustling of leaves. Sal began his descent down the hill, heading towards a clearing where prairie met forest. It was there where he noticed something strange, a tall, thin silhouette atop a dead tree stump. At first, Sal assumed it was a soldier, but as he moved closer, he realized that something was off. The figure twitched, and then under the moonlight, Sal saw its true form. It was a pale, emaciated humanoid with elongated limbs, gripping the stump tightly. Its head was bald, and although Sal couldn't clearly see its face, the overall impression was that of something unnatural, like a human, but wrong. The creature didn't seem startled at first, but as Sal began to speak, it shifted, and that's when Sal realized it wasn't a fellow soldier. Panic surged through him as the creature quickly scrambled down the stump. Sal instinctively flicked on his red light, catching a glimpse of the creature moving on all fours, heading in his direction. Sal kept toggling his headlamp, first to white light, and then to flashing red. In the brief flashes, he saw the creature ducking behind the bush, apparently trying to keep its distance. It was moving fast, yet it remained eerily quiet, its movements quick and deliberate. He began moving at an angle, slowly working his way towards a nearby road that would lead him back to his platoon's base. But as he moved, the rustling in the woods continued, and Sal couldn't shake the sense that the creature was following him. His anxiety mounted as he heard the sounds of branches snapping and twigs shifting. It was getting closer. Sal finally broke into a sprint, pushing his body to the limit. He ran blindly through the woods, tripping over logs and scrambling to get away. After what felt like an eternity, he reached the road, exhausted and gasping for breath. He dared not to stop for a moment, fearing the creature was still lurking behind him. He kept running until he reached the parked vehicles where his platoon was waiting. Sal arrived back at the base just after 12:15, his platoon members questioning him about his muddy clothes and out-of-breath condition, but Sal kept his encounter to himself. The last thing he wanted was to appear foolish, especially when he knew what he saw couldn't be easily explained. In the years that followed, Sal never encountered anything like it again. Fort McCoy didn't have a history of disappearances, and the nearby towns of Sparta and Toma had no known reports of similar creatures. Despite his resolve to dismiss the experience, Sal knew that the creature he had encountered was real, and that night would forever haunt him. The South Carolina Stalker. Anna was just a regular young woman from a neighborhood just south of Charleston, South Carolina. She had been working long, stressful hours during the pandemic, and like many others, had lost her usual ways of unwinding. One of her favorite activities was taking late-night walks through a trail behind her neighborhood. but after some exhausting shifts, she hadn't the chance for a walk in weeks. Anna packed her headlamp and set off towards the wooded trail, which stretched about 4 miles into the forest. She planned on walking 1.5 miles in before taking a parallel path to loop back. It was a familiar route, a peaceful place she'd visited many times before. As she ventured deeper into the woods, Anna couldn't shake the nagging sensation that somebody was watching her. Her unease grew until she decided to turn off her headlamp, staying perfectly still to listen. She was hoping it was just the wind or perhaps an animal, but when she heard the footsteps, clear, deliberate crunching in the leaves, she realized she wasn't alone. The sound seemed to be following her. Her heart began to race as she stopped and listened, counting the footsteps in the distance. After a few minutes of eerie silence, she figured it was just some person following her, maybe a fellow walker, but she decided to make her way back. She flicked her headlamp back on and quietly began to walk at a brisk pace, her steps matching the rhythm of her quickened heartbeat. A couple of minutes later, though, the footsteps returned, but this time something was different. It sounded like there were 4 feet, not 2. They kept pace with her, as though the creature, whatever it was matching her speed. Anna quickly spun around, shining her headlamp and phone flashlight behind her, but there was nothing. She shouted out in frustration, warning whoever was behind her that she had a knife and would call the cops if they didn't back off. Her voice echoed through the trees, but there was no response, only the rustling of leaves. Feeling uneasy, Anna continued walking, but she couldn't shake the fear gnawing at her. Then around 20 yards ahead, she saw something in the distance. It was moving too fast, too unnaturally. The figure appeared to be a person, but as it darted between the trees, Anna noticed something was horribly wrong. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man, but it was running on all 4s. It was disturbingly fast, its back flat as it moved with the grace of something designed to move this way. Anna froze in shock as she watched the creature disappear into the woods. It was completely hairless with pale white skin, and its body didn't seem right. It was clearly not human, and Anna's fear deepened. Her mind raced with explanations. Maybe it was a prank or some weird animal, but she couldn't deny what she had seen. She hurriedly continued down the trail, glancing over her shoulder to make sure the creature wasn't following. When she was only about 1/4 mile away from the safety of her neighborhood, she heard it again. A mad dash through the underbrush, the sound of something quickly closing the distance between them. Anna whipped around to face it, but this time it stopped abruptly. She caught a glimpse of its head behind a tree, and then, out of nowhere, it cackled. The sound was eerily familiar, like a monkey's cackle, but it was far too sinister, the tone full of mocking, malicious glee. It was as if the creature was playing with her, enjoying the terror it had caused. Anna turned and ran, not stopping until she was safely back in her home, heart pounding in her chest. She called the police and reported a man stalking her, but when they arrived, they found no sign of him. Only disturbed leaves and dirt around 50 feet into the woods. No footprints. The officers concluded it was just some animal, but Anna knew better. She had seen something she couldn't explain, something human in shape, but deeply wrong in every other way. Weeks later, Anna still couldn't shake the image of that pale crawling creature, and the chilling cackle it made. She had no answers, just lingering questions about the kind of creature it could have been. Pale crawlers are definitely some of the creepiest things out there. The way they move, the way they look, it's just unsettling. And people keep seeing these things. There's more and more reports, and no one really knows what they are. Are they some kind of creature? Are they like a cryptid? Is it some kind of person? Is it a human? Or are people just seeing things? Just like any of these cryptids, is this thing real? Where are all these accounts coming from? They're definitely not something you'd want to run into in the middle of the night. Let me know in the comments if you think that crawlers are real or what you think they are, or if you know someone who's ever seen something like this. Pale crawlers are one of the creepiest cryptids. Please let me know in the comments what you think these things are, or if you've ever seen anything like this. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and thank you Patreons, you guys are amazing. I'll see you guys next time. Hello, I'm glad you're still here because there's a secret bonus story for those who stay till the very end. Gary's encounter with the pale crawler. Gary, a farmer from the Midwest, shares an encounter from 2019. Late one evening, he was working alone in his barn. It was the kind of night where the cold seemed to hang in the air, and it was abnormally quiet. The only sounds were the occasional creaks of the old barn and the faint rustling of hay. He said while he was repairing one of his barn stalls, he felt on his arm a cold, slimy sensation, as if something wet had brushed against him. It wasn't just a fleeting touch, he says, it felt deliberate, as if something had reached out to make contact. He froze, a cold chill running down his spine. He quickly spun around, heart racing, expecting to see an animal or some kind of intruder, but the barn was empty. There was nothing there. Puzzled and unnerved, Gary stood still for a moment, trying to dismiss the sensation as nothing more than his imagination playing tricks on him in the dim light. But the unease lingered. He could still feel the cold touch on his arm, as if it were burned into his skin. Something about the encounter didn't sit right with him. Deciding he needed some fresh air, Gary made his way outside. As he stepped into the cool night, his eyes scanned the yard, the edge of the forest just beyond the field, and that's when he saw it. In the distance, near the tree line, he caught a glimpse of something moving, a pale crawling figure, its movements jerky and unnatural. The creature was hunched over, its long limbs scraping the earth as it moved with disturbing speed. Its skin was an eerie, sickly white, and its head was twisted at an odd angle, as though it was observing him. The creature disappeared into the woods, vanishing from view as quickly as it had appeared. Gary stood there, frozen in place, staring at the dark forest. For weeks after that night, Gary couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still out there, lurking just beyond the trees. And there you have it. I'm so glad you made it to this secret story tonight. Thanks for staying until the very end. See you in the next one.